Hello, this is Ahskance. Shocker. I mean, I'm on the screen. Alright, so I'm going to do part 2 of the 2019 CC Summit. This is talking about the CV rework. This is about, I think it's like 5 months in. Patch 8.5 has just dropped, and I have done a video on the bulk of this, which is about 45 minutes worth of time. And the Q&A section is probably, in my opinion, the most misunderstood section of this. Partially because they had time to, put together actual presentation, which you can rehearse and figure out what you're going to say. But in Q&A, everything's off the cuff. The other thing is, they're not native English speakers. So when you have somebody that's extremely fluent in English talking to somebody that's trying to struggle to find the words, but trying to give you, the best they can, you can have some mistranslations, some weirdness. There's specifically one section in here which I think was aggressively misunderstood. So again, we're going to try and give context to it and just sort of finish this out because I woke up way too early this morning, so I've got time. So here we go.
We'll give you the opportunity to ask.
Right. The spreadsheets did show that the CV average damage is still the highest across the board, and the influence on the battle was apparently still the highest. I have to ask, is this what you're intending? Is this your goal, to have this class that already has such safety and utility to also be the highest damage dealer across the board?
The spreadsheet, it does say that, but what it doesn't say is it is based on what happened at the end of the battle. So like what happened in the full battle, but it doesn't capture really what happens inside the battle based on like timestamps, because there obviously is some point in the battle where it is decided, and like say we think that there might be at least some amount of damage from CV being in this not relevant area, like say when there are a couple ships left and the carrier is more like powerful against single targets, and so it can in the late game where it is mostly decided but still not ended, it can wrap up some more damage, which will be seen in this battle influence graphics. And we're actively trying to get our hands on this data, because this data, like, there's huge amounts of it, and there's just like some technical problems with storing it and capturing it. But we really hope to get to the point where we really understand why we have the battle influence clearly bigger than the other classes, but the win rate distribution stays mostly the same, because the win rate, the battle influence, this much of a battle influence would naturally correspond to a more skill difference, but we don't really see that, and that's why we're trying to investigate it.
All right, he might keep going, but because it's kind of a long reply, we're just going to kind of go. So basically, I think it was Flamu asked. This video is from Flamu, so if he recorded this with his cell phone, or whoever the hell recorded this heard him, or maybe he spoke on the mic, I don't know, so we can hear him clearly when he asks his question, which is good. He's asking, hey, so CVs are doing the most damage, and yet they're the safest. They're in the back of the map. They're not putting their hull at risk. What the hell? Why is this okay? To which the response was, well, yeah, that's what's going on right now, but we're still trying to figure out as to how that's all working out. Well, what the hell does that mean? You're still trying to figure something out 5 months in? Planes shoot things. Planes do damage. This isn't that deep. The beginning part of his response was, well, the first thing you have to do is figure out, is the damage meaningful? What do you mean meaningful damage? Well, sometimes you play a game where you lose all your destroyers in the first 5 minutes, and then at that point you don't have a way in, and you just slowly get farmed and murdered. Sometimes that happens, in which case the CV's damage is basically irrelevant because there is no pulling back that game. Sometimes the game can go on for 8 or 10 minutes before one flank breaks in totality, and then suddenly there's not really a way back for the other team, in which case people start to scatter, and a CV is going to overperform against isolated ships, specifically in the late game if they have resources. Why? Because isolated ships aren't going to have enough AA to really chisel down the planes, which means they come back to hit again and again. Also, remember that this is all the information from patches 8.0 to 8.4. 8.5 dropped 1 day prior to this presentation, and the biggest issue from 8.0 to 8.4 was resource loss. Planes didn't effing die. So if you get into a situation where people start to scatter to the wind, and AA doesn't kill planes in the first place because of the RNG distribution of the damage, then absolutely they're going to overperform. They're going to strike and strike and strike over and over and over again with little to possibly zero plane loss. Yeah, you're just going to rip somebody in half. 8.5 completely changed the landscape on this. Even higher end players, some of the best CVs in the world, said 8.5 was rough. Like, really rough. There was some pretty significant resource loss. There were things that you could not take. There were simply fights that you could not, in good faith, do anything about it. You could go in there and throw every plane you had at it and get nothing done. So unfortunately, we don't have the data from 8.5 and after, because this presentation was prior to it. But I can tell you that that's going to change the landscape a lot. So, a different way to contextualize this. You roll in a surface cruiser. You come out, your cruiser's fairly high damage, you're firing, you're lighting some fires, you do some stuff, whatever. You end up doing 80,000 damage, 100,000 damage, 140,000 damage, and then you end up getting taken out within 6 minutes of the start of the match. Your 160,000 damage delivered in the first 6 minutes is going to affect more of the match than 160,000 damage delivered over 15 minutes by a carrier that's safe in the back of the map and not dying. So what he transitioned to say is, if we're seeing something where, okay, this class obviously has the most influence because it has spotting, it has damage, it has this, it has that. You know, we saw that in the previous thing that was shown, because I guess Sub-Octavian's swapping around or whatever to try to give the graphs that he's talking about at the time. If you see something that has the highest influence and can deal the most damage, well, then it stands to reason that the CV should simply dominate in terms of gameplay, because it has the most options on the table, it has the most ability to to affect the match and make things happen. And yet, they're looking at it and they find win rates are just not that way. This graph specifically, we kind of covered it earlier, but this is where they go down percentage of the player base by skill, and how they find skill is arbitrary. They don't quite explain it, but we're gonna have to assume that they've done the best case estimate that they can to try to give a proper representation of it. So it could be win rate, it could be damage, it could be base XP, it could be how all the different metrics that they've come in to try and figure this out with. And you can see with the new CV, which has the highest battle influence of the 4 classes, it has less than the old CV, but still has the highest battle influence per their previous graph, has the highest damage, relative damage to the other classes. You can see that somewhere down here in the skill level, you're basically averaging out around a 50% win rate. You have to jump up a section before you start to see that in the carrier. So it actually takes a more skilled individual to pull the win rate of a less skilled individual in a destroyer, cruiser, battleship. And that just doesn't make sense when you're looking at something that supposedly has the most influence possible in the game, that has the best damage possible in the game. So one of the biggest issues, and I mentioned this in the prior version of the video, is that the problem with having data is that when you have lots and lots and lots of data, it's really easy to just think, is this the problem? And you can go find data that says, oh yes, this is definitely the problem, and then just to enact on it. Because there's some form of data somewhere that can justify almost any conclusion you might have when you just dive into a sea of raw information. So it's about trying to take the information that's there and uncover what's actually going on. What's leading to this? What's leading to that? Again, if a carrier's kicking out an average of 150,000 damage, is it doing it in a burst window of 3 minutes at the beginning of the match? Is it doing it over 15 minutes, which is going to fundamentally interact with the other players in the match in a different way?
Up to some point.
But isn't a lot of the damage also incredibly powerful damage? Like, doesn't the carrier have the highest cap reset rate of all classes as well?
Yeah, and it is captured in the battle influence metrics.
Yeah, and DD damage, it's the only class that can do it consistently. I mean, I don't think you can just neglect the damage as unimportant, because it can strike anything.
I don't neglect it, I just state what our current view of this is. As you see, we dropped the battle influence already, and I'm sure it will drop more with the DPS change in 8.5, so we're working on it.
My question was, is your goal to drop it to the level of the other classes?
Okay. Again, he's kind of having a back and forth here, saying something like, well, isn't the damage of the power of the CV powerful? Meaning that a CV's position, if the CV wants to affect Battleship A on the left flank, he can go over and attempt to affect Battleship A on the left flank. So you can choose where to place that damage, almost irrespective of your position on the map, which makes the damage powerful. But there's a difference when you say something powerful, people tend to think big numbers. They tend to think you're going to show up and you're going to deal like 50,000 damage, you're going to rip a battleship in half. CVs were limited in that way, or at least that was one of the design goals, was to make multiple interactions, multiple iterations or pieces of damage. So you'd be doing 10,000, 10,000, 10,000, which would eventually build up. Where the midway could hit for 20 and maybe spin around and hit for another 20 on an isolated battleship. So if somebody's position allowed them to get struck twice, that could certainly be a thing. So there are instances where powerful damage does actually translate to big numbers. However, the larger amount of interactions are going to be on the more 15 to 20,000 tops sort of scale, coming in single attack, coming in single attack. I think the dev kind of responds, well, yes, we're trying to look at that, and yes, that's why we're looking at this information. But again, they have had, I'm going to take a bit of a detour on this. When Wargaming puts out a controversial change, you'll notice it's extremely rare that they somehow just reverse the change in a week or 2 weeks. They tend to let the change happen, filter out into the community, and see what happens with people having the learning process, which is going to take weeks or even months, both on the receiving end as well as the dealing end. So if they buff battleships, how much better are battleships players doing with it? How much worse is it for all the other classes in the game after they have buffed the battleships? They're going to see what that data looks like over 3, 4, maybe even longer, maybe 5 months, so that they can try to actually get in there and try to figure out, well, we did this, we, as developers and gamers, we know what this means, but is this translating into reality? So, sorry, it is 6 in the morning. When you're translating this concept of a powerful attack because you can choose what to attack, does that translate into influence? Yes, but we've already talked about in terms of raw damage, if the raw damage was powerful enough and the ability to use it was powerful enough, we should have seen a higher corresponding win rate in the higher end classes, and yet higher skilled players were doing worse in CVs than they were doing in surface ships, which didn't make any sense. So I guess I'm reiterating that. It's going to go into a separate part of the question, which I think is a little different now.
Our goal is to, we want to...
Oh, I'm sorry. I think Flamo asked, is your goal to bring basically damage in line with the other with the other classes, because CVs are so safe, are you going to try to bring that damage curve, like sink it below battleships and cruisers and maybe into where destroyers are, because destroyers might have to play safe where they can't really guarantee lots of damage. CVs innately play safe because they're hidden behind the back of the map, that sort of thing. Like, where are they going to try to put this damage number? And I think the dev does not actually respond to that. I think he tries to respond to the meaningful side of that in a game interaction, but I don't think he actually responds to it in a direct way.
For it to be closer to the other classes, sure, but we also always need to keep an eye out on the CV popularity, because we don't want to make it uncomfortable to play at all. And that's also like we've seen this in the charts and popularity, that this engine boosts affected it, and so we'll need to find ways how to affect the battle influence of carriers, and at the same time not make playing carriers like a super unfun experience.
Okay, this little snippet has probably been twisted to become this big massive ass thing over the past years about, well, if you're balancing around popularity, what does that mean? Well, if carrier numbers start to drop, well, then they're just going to buff carriers. They're going to make carriers even stronger because they've got to get those numbers up. They got to justify to the shareholders, yada, yada, yada. If they wanted to do that, they could have done it already. And yet, for the 5 months that this has existed, it's nerfs, nerfs, nerfs. We know for the next 2 years, literally the next 2 years, I think carriers received a buff in terms of the commander rework because they gained additional skills which allowed them to do different things. However, oh, and also the consumable mod was added somewhere in there that interacts with fighters. And technically from this point, carriers received a buff in patch 8.7 when they halved all the AA on all the surface ships because of the instantaneous damage which was added via the priority sector mechanic. And also because after patch 8.5, holy effing shit, the AA damage was just brutal. They had to do something. So in a sense, you could say that they've been buffed when 8.7 hit, when the commander rework hit and gave them additional capability, and I think that's it. Everything else has been an interaction which has tried to target a specific area and pull out influence. Broadside reticle rework, AP damage rework, the commander skill rework actually increased the anti-air capability of other classes by giving them more and stronger options. There was a flak update which has made flak much more oppressive, which has been tons of fun in clan battles, by the way. They have consistently tried to affect this or that specific area of the carrier and other ship interactions, and it has almost always been in a place that pulls the carrier down. Now, that could be because carrier players are simply learning more and performing higher. It could be that the overall picture of the carrier in general is pretty okay, which I do believe it is. The AP bomb nerf happened after clan battles, I think because the Hakuryu was a little too oppressive, being able to strike bunkered up positions. And this was before cruisers had the better AA talents and the flak was reworked. Also, but really after that, after the AP damage nerf, the only change that I've seen was them trying to interact with how does a carrier interact with destroyers, which resulted in a broadside reticle rework, which happened about 9 to 10 months ago. And while you would think that might have filtered out to the populace or to the player base, it just didn't, which is why we've recently received the rocket changes now, where there's an animation delay, which is going to push that off. The core of this question, to go back to the Q&A section, my mind is wandering way too much. I might have to redo this. The core of the question is, when you say popularity, does that mean that... Let me shift off this, sorry. What the game developer is trying to say is, if you have a car, and the car is not safe enough, there are two ways you could make it safer. You could, one, reduce the speed of the engine. That way, if it's going half as fast as it used to go, it's much less likely for you to swing into a wreck or you to have some kind of accident or have some kind of issue. Because you've reduced the capability of the car is now more safe. However, the car is likely less enjoyable than it once was. If it was driving at 80 miles an hour, but now it's limited to 40, it's kind of a different vehicle. It's a different experience. Or you could add a different style of tire so that the tire, instead of being this wide, ends up being this wide. If you double the amount of friction that it's got going on with the ground, it's less likely that even at higher speeds that you're going to ever lose control. You'll have much more responsive stopping power. You'll have much more responsive turning power. It means that by altering the ability to control the car, you can put it into a better situation that ends up being safer for not only the player, but everyone else. That's a really weird metaphor. What the hell are you talking about with a car? It means that if people are going to play a carrier, that carrier in their head is going to do carrier stuff. So if you just beat the shit out of the carrier, and let's say this damage number that, battleships, it's a little higher, whatever. They just beat the shit out of this damage number. Chunk, 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 chunk. Goes down past battleships, past cruisers, starts sitting around. Maybe it's even below destroyers because of how innately safe the class is. It means that a carrier player might spend an entire minute flying across the map to go over and hit something for 2,000 damage. 2,000? What are you talking about? Because an average destroyer damage could easily be 35 to 40,000. So I want you to imagine if you're in a carrier and you have a 15-minute match, which is the average match length, and you're doing 2,000 damage per minute, then you're dealing 30,000 average damage. That's what it results in. If you wanted to put a carrier at a safe relative damage level, that might be what you end up doing. But at the same time, is it going to feel like a carrier? Is it going to feel like you're executing on the interest or the intent of the class? Should a car go fast? Yes. Should it be safe? Yes. How can you make it safe and yet go fast? Should a carrier be interesting? Yes. Should a carrier not overwhelm the other classes? Yes. How do you make it interesting without it overwhelming the other classes? This is the part of game design which can be extremely frustrating to do, to try to figure out how to make this idea or this class mechanic really come out and shine, and yet allow everybody else to have their equal and happy time in the sun. Basically, how do you make everybody feel overpowered and amazing while they interact with everyone else that feels overpowered and amazing? That is extremely tough, but it's also the sign of great game design because some people are able to do it. I think I'm going to go back to letting him go.
But doesn't it kind of sound like you're artificially boosting popularity by making the class stronger than the others?
No, we didn't because we already are dropping it and we intend to drop it and we showed it to you. So
what he's talking about with we've already dropped it. I think Flammo is still talking about damage. I think the dev, is talking about influence. Again, if back in part 1 of this, there was a section on battle influence, and they cut the speed of carriers. So let's say they cut 20 to 25 knots. That's what they cut out of the planes, 20 to 25 knots. We'll just give that as a basic BS number. And you immediately saw, in terms of the data and how people performed in the game, carriers dropped down, destroyers went up. Almost like completely they mirrored each other. Just the game was immediately different. And yet, the game felt the same. So people that were expecting, I need this nerf, we need this change, we have to have this altered, didn't feel like anything was different. And carriers, I think for the most part, didn't feel like very much was different either. So, with that game design, everybody needs to feel like they're doing, they're executing on their dream. Well, that speed change actually still allowed carriers to execute on their dream, still allowed other people to do it, but it ended up making for a healthier dynamic. That being said, as a player, it doesn't feel like anything changed. He's trying to state, the dev is trying to state, we are trying to rein things in. We are trying to alter things to make things more, make things closer relative to each other. Whereas Flammu is taking this in the position of, oh, so you're saying if the population drops too much, then you're just going to throw buffs at carriers. He's looking at it in like as an audience member. The presenter's trying to answer it in like as a game developer, and the two are just talking past each other.
It's just that some tweaks may be more painful than others, and that's what I'm saying. We need to find tweaks that are less painful to playing the class, but at the same time affect the battle influence.
Less painful to playing the class. Again, reduce the speed of the car. Doesn't feel like a good car anymore. Alter the way the car works to make it safer. It makes everybody else on the road safer as well. So I know it's a weird analogy, but in my head it works. And again, it's 6 a.m.
Okay, so we're talking about a slew of AA improvements to make AA more consistent and to empower surface ship players to be able to shoot down carriers. Nowhere in that discussion did I hear you guys talk about what you hypothesize would be the impact on the CV playing experience, because that's concerning. Once again, I raise the same problems as I've always done, which is there should always be play, counterplay, and then counterplay. The problem I see always with the way you guys do CV sort of AA balance changes is it's always like, okay, well, we've got the play, and here's the counterplay, but what is the CV supposed to do? When you say, like, let's go and take 5% HP off of your aircraft, how do I mitigate this at all besides, okay, well, I'll just send smaller squadrons out? Like, is that it? Is that, like, the end of what I'm supposed to do? Like, what am I, as a carrier player, hypothetically, supposed to do when the opposing thing that's playing against me is just a number? Like, it's not a player, it's a number. What am I doing? What am I playing?
He's going to respond, and we'll hear that in a second. Just to contextualize this question, because it brings up counterplay, and we have talked about that earlier. There's a lot of people that have a different concept of what counterplay is. I think in a game developer term, counterplay means the ability to respond to a situation. It's not just you get shot by a laser weapon, the laser hits, you die. What was the counterplay? What was your option? Well, don't get hit. Woohoo! There's not a lot of option in there if the laser is instant, immediate, and has perfect aim. If it has imperfect aim, if it's a slow traveling beam thing and you can dodge the beam, if it has a warning that it's going to be showing up in a few seconds, you can duck behind cover. Those are instances of counterplay in that you're giving a player something to respond to so that they can respond to the situation and either mitigate it, negate it, or turn it in their favor, whatever. So I think it was iChase there. You know, ideally, you have play, counterplay, and counterplay. So the play of the CV is to go out with planes to strike something. And the counterplay, in I guess this instance, is for the surface ship to have AA, which can beat back the planes, to kill them outright, or to cause resource loss during the interaction. Which, again, from 8.4 before, they didn't have plane loss. Yes, it happened, especially with lower skilled players, but the system itself was designed in such a way that it just didn't result in resource loss. So you didn't really have any of that counter. The AA didn't matter. But then counterplay. What can the CV do to mitigate either the increased AA of the surface ship or maybe the bolstered AA of many surface ships? CVs don't necessarily have a way around that. But is that a bad thing? If the enemy has decided to group 3 ships together to overlay their AA so strongly that you don't have a way in, you don't have an interaction there, should CVs still have an interaction? No. Or rather, I should say, it's okay for them not to be able to have an interaction. Because AA is an aura effect. It's basically a resistance effect. If somebody was in a different game, maybe casting ice magic, and you had somebody that had an anti-ice magic aura, and you put 3 of them together in close proximity, their resistance to ice magic might be so high that you just don't get to hurt them with ice magic. realistically you need to strike them with something else. You need to strike them with fire, or you need to strike them with lightning. Well, similarly on the board for World of Warships, if you group 3 ships together and their AA becomes too much and the CV does not have a way in, well, then you're not striking them with CV magic. You're not attacking them with plane magic. You're attacking them with shells. You're attacking them with torpedoes. You're attacking them with other things. And something that's brought up very often on the forums is, well, if you group for AA, then you're giving away your map position. If you have a variety of people that are all in this little area here, well, that means that the enemy could be up there as well as to their right, to their left, and have them in a crossfire to shoot them, because 3 ships spread out are going to have angles, and having angles will end up resulting in more damage than 3 ships clustered and all shooting from the same direction. Just to recap, if you're bolstering surface ships AA, what does the CV do in response to this? Well, the answer is respect the AA. And it also means that you need to rely on your teammates to break through the AA. Now, they don't have the AA interaction because shells don't give a shit about anti-aircraft fire. But it does mean that you have to fall back to your teammates. So you've given your teammates an advantage by them clustering for AA. If they spread out to take advantage against your teammates, they've given you advantage to try to come in and do stuff. It's more of an interplay sort of thing than a specific, this class gets this buff or this nerf.
That's what I said a bit earlier. It's about managing your resources. Your planes are your resources. So you basically you choose targets at which you want to attack and evaluate how much of the damage you will get from that, and that's your tactical play. Your that's what you're playing, and as well as the drops and how amount of damage you will deal to the target. That's what you're playing. So you're picking a target, knowing that you will lose some of the planes, and keeping in mind how much you need to deal X amount of damage to that target.
So he's basically saying the play is planes come and strike something. The counterplay is the AA forces the planes off or limits the engagement window of the planes. And the counterplay is if the AA is too strong, the CV does something else. They go, oh, I can't address this right now, and they go and deal with something else on the map. Which I suppose is something you could say, because there's probably a target somewhere that's more strikeable, more viable. It's not always the case. It could be that both flanks are very hardened up, or that there's just not a way in. That's definitely a possibility. But in terms of counterplay, it's not choosing an interaction, which is funky, but it's still an option that's available. There's nothing to say that you just don't take that shot right now. If you're in a destroyer, sometimes you don't throw those torps because I'm not right now. This ship has too many options. I can't guarantee my torps are going to hit. I'll sit on it. I'll wait. Right now I can't strike these targets. They're too strong against what I can do. I'm gonna wait. And somebody in chat was saying, or make AA skill based. AA is skill based in the sense that your position on the board allows you to use AA relative to your teammates. It could be that you're spread out, but because you're spread out, maybe you're in this position and the enemy CV is coming down. If you're spread out in this position, the only way to attack you is to come into the middle, which means you're interacting with both sets of AA. They don't have to be directly on top of each other. Or you could cut in this way, in which case there's not really a position through the middle. They have to come on the outside. If they come on the outside, they're only interacting with one ship. If you instead move this position, if they try to come to strike you from a broadside, they're coming into the AA of 2 ships. Its board position is the skill. And also, they did add priority sector, which is theoretically skill-based in the sense that you pay attention to where the planes are and you hit the button. But AA is primarily position-based, more so than, shooting down the planes and stuff.
Okay, but as any other class in the game, let's hypothetically say, as a battleship, if I am going to go into a trade, I understand that if I go into a trade, I can angle at a certain angle to mitigate a potential return fire. So then I have some way to mitigate the other player. The other player also has some way to mitigate what I'm doing. So therefore, it becomes a challenge of who better executes the maneuver, who better executes their positioning. if I'm playing just with a number generator that always says every time you come to attack me here, you lose this many planes, I'm not playing a game. I'm playing against a number and then just simply saying, okay, everything just comes down to another spreadsheet.
So he's talking about the concept of trades. You've got two ships, say they're equal ships. You got battleship versus a battleship. This guy's shooting, and every time he shoots, he's hitting for 8k. This guy's shooting, every time he shoots, he's hitting for 6. Who's winning the trades? Well, the guy who's dealing more damage is the person who's probably coming ahead. That could be because of how they're angled. It could be because of how they're positioned. It comes down to two players interacting with each other. Who's getting the better of the exchange? And iChase was saying that if I'm coming around in planes, and the easiest way to think of AA is how many planes do you lose in order to strike a ship, which is much more relevant patch 8.5 and beyond than it actually is patch 8.0 to 8.4, because 8.0 to 8.4 is more like you lose all the planes or you lose none of the planes. But right now, if you strike a ship, you lose 2 planes. How much damage are you getting? 7,000? 7,000 to 2 planes. Is it worth it? If you were striking something, you lose 4 planes and you're dealing 7,000. 7,000 to 4 planes. Is it worth it? You have to start looking at those resource costs. That's going to be something that a CV has to figure out. That's just standard gameplay. But if he's looking at this in terms of like, well, the surface ship doesn't have to do anything special. All the surface ship does is sit there and kill 2 of my planes. Isn't that bullshit? I tend to look at it similar to armor. If you have enough armor, you're going to shatter an amount of shells. That's just what's going to happen. You don't get to alter or change the armor of the battleship or the ship you're in on the fly. You could position it in a way where the armor is not going to be very helpful to you. In terms of AA, that could be putting it behind an island where you're easy to be interacted with. So there's just no AA. They come over, they hit you. Haha, you got dunked. But if somebody's chucking HE shells downrange at a battleship, a lot of those shells are going to shatter. Some of them are going to get through. It's mitigating X amount of shells. Anyway, I don't know. I think I'm just super rambly. Sorry.
At what point is this a gameplay thing, and at which point am I just playing a spreadsheet? Because if I'm playing a spreadsheet, I might as well just go play with Microsoft Excel. It's much easier.
You're playing with first flag bubbles that deal, although they may be mitigated and that's part of the gameplay, they deal quite significant amount of damage to planes. That's the first part. And the next part is you can try to evade this damage by actually coming from like the terrain, because then the AA won't see you, and thus it's about picking your targets and when to strike them, as well as mitigating the damage from the bubbles.
So he's just saying pretty much, well, if striking this ship means I lose 3 planes, isn't that bullshit? Like, where's the interaction? Well, the interaction is you're choosing your target. Is that the target to shoot right now? The interaction is that target close to an island? Can I mitigate the AA and get a strike off for losing less planes? That's making the choice. Are there too many ships close together that the flak is too thick and heavy and I can't get through? Maybe I just can't take this strike right now. How many resources you bring also comes into play. I think the concept of pre-dropping was done basically. If you're going to suicide into a single run and you're going to lose all your planes doing it, if you pre-drop, then at least you're putting less resources at risk. So he's looking at it in terms of gameplay. I don't think he's seeing this like impassionate number generator thing. He's just, well, you have the gameplay, you make your game decision. So it seemed like one person was asking one thing, the response was something else.
Hello? Yeah. Okay, so the first question is like, you said your goal is to increase the civil population. And I mean, is that goal achieved? Your goal is to increase the civil population. Is that, I mean, do you have a standard of which kind of civil population you want to achieve?
One of the goals was to increase the population. Like we are okay at the numbers we end up with right now.
Okay.
But the point is that while keeping all this balance in mind, fun in mind, class interaction in mind. If it drops to this level, from product point of view, it will be just waste of a lot of resources. Like,
Okay.
if the same amount of people play carriers, but we reworked everything, what's the point? So we don't want to drop it really lower, but this level, like this latest trend, is okay for us. We don't want it to skyrocket as well, of course.
Okay.
That's fine. Like, and as I said, the fact that right now almost quarter of the audience plays, as you see, the popularity of carriers is not like quarter of the popularity. No, but quarter of players on regular basis. They included the carriers in their roster, so it's more diversity for each player. It's okay.
Okay. So the following question is like, actually we are seeing like very similar things happen for like pre-rework. So you are buffing AA so much, like each version, and so are you like? I think we are expecting that the CV population is dropping.
Yes, it's a risk. We evaluated the AA change on 0.85 PTS as we could, but as I mentioned before in the presentation, with this limited test environment, it's not so easy to evaluate everything. So if by any chance on some tiers or on some specific carriers this 0.85 change will have excessive effect, we will be ready to dispatch some hotfixes in the middle of the update. So we will be watching, Ivan will be watching the stats very, very closely. And if any problems pop up with this change, we will compensate somehow. So we need to keep it balanced. We don't want to hammer CVs into the ground. We want to hammer them to the acceptable levels, which everybody can be more or less happy with.
So
this actually reminds me, I think somewhere around patch 8.5, they altered survivability expert to give an additional 5 health per tier. So your planes could have an additional 50 health or something. And when 8.5 hit, it was just a nuclear bomb. So having an additional 50 health per plane was like, are you serious with this? Maybe it was 100 health. Actually, I think it was 100. I think it went from like plus 15 health per tier for a plane to plus 25. So it was an extra 100 health. And so that was going to change stuff. That might have been the hot fix that that happened. I don't remember when that happened. It might have been back then. This is going to be the other side of the popularity thing. If you nerf the shit out of carriers, how are you going to deal with this? But the guy was saying, well, we've seen this before where looks like CVs are too strong. You're buffing AA, you're buffing AA, you're buffing AA. I mean, if this is going to be the trend, how do you expect people to keep playing this? Well, I mean, his response was, we're going to have to do what we have to do. We have to get this to the point where we feel that it sits correctly and people are able to play, the game that they're supposed to be able to play. So yeah, that's going to be the thing, which is exactly what happens. 8.5 comes in, it wrecks face. They do the survivability expert change. And then ultimately 8.7 is going to pull back on AA to get it to the place that it is now, because it's been largely unaffected since then.
Then the following question after the following question, like you are buffing AA, but you are not giving anything to CV, like preparation time buff, no thing. But the plan here, it's obviously will be more, right? You will lose more plans, but you don't give CV more plans.
That's what we can tweak. That's the first thing. And then second thing, with the 8.5, we also kind of buffed the CV speed when they're trying to reduce the speed on force edge. That means that the planes will have, it will be easier for a plane to move its prediction and maneuver more with the force edge. So that's the aspect that we're buffing. It may not seem as a big one, but we already saw that the engine boost nerf, while it wasn't seen as a huge one, it actually affected a bit. So, and in 8.5, we're trying to kind of revert some of this and to make playing the carriers more comfortable.
Okay.
Next one.
I'll be honest, I don't really know what playing carriers more comfortable with patch 8.5 was. I don't know how to translate that one because that was not what happened. But I think the questioner was like, well, if you're buffing AA, then how are you buffing carriers? And well, realistically, they weren't. They were pulling carriers back because carriers were too far ahead. It's just, that's the process of balancing. You release something, you see how it goes. And they had months where carriers were just in a position where they had to be fundamentally altered. Over and over and over again, they had to try to figure, how do we get these into the place that we want them to be? Ultimately, that place ended up being patch 8.7. As they've remained largely the same since. But I think it's incorrect from the questioner's point of view to think, well, if you're gonna buff surface ships, why aren't you buffing carriers at the same time? Like, isn't that uneven? Yes, in the sense of, if you give this dog a treat, you have to give that dog a treat, so they'll feel, equal. But in terms of game design, if one thing is higher than the other, if you knock it down a peg, that's perfectly okay.
On the same topic, it went from 15% almost to 30, and now it's leveled out around 22 or so. So every time any kind of buff to AA is obviously going to affect it in a negative. Do you guys have a critical mass percentage that you want to keep it at or above?
Oh, well,
18%, 19%.
I think he's going to reiterate that.
Yeah, for players. I mean, because basically, if it gets unpopular, you're going to buff it or nerf AAs, and then it seems like kind of a trade-off in a way.
We certainly don't want to drop this be like lower than pre-rework numbers.
Yeah.
In terms of if more players will include carriers in their roster, but they play them rarely, and the population is stable, then it's fine. But of course we don't want to drop it, and we'll monitor it very closely. Having the class for small amounts of players who generate a lot of battles doesn't make sense to us, really, because it will lead to the exact problems that happened before rework.
So ideally, he's trying to. Oh my God, I'm sorry. This was brought up in the previous question, extended here, and I don't think I addressed it previously. If they had, I'm gonna make up numbers here. If they had 8% of the player base that routinely played, and it shot up to 15, and then they nerf and they nerf and they nerf, and it goes all the way down to 8 or 7 or 6. He said something about, well, then it would have been a waste of resources. Yes, and also no. Because yes, it would be a waste of resources in the sense that you don't have gamers playing your game. So you spent months or years trying to do something that didn't result in a meaningful use across the player base, which kind of sucks. World of Warcraft had a similar issue with this. They would design raids in their content. They'd have, the first raid, the second meaner raid, the third even harder, and then the fourth gigantic, massive, this thing is like just, it's terribly hard, incredibly hard raid. And they found that like 1% of the population of the game ever experienced the 4th tier raid. So they spent all of this developer time coming up with art assets, coming up with story assets, coming up with quests, coming up with voice lines and dialogue, coming up with battle mechanics, coming up with all of this stuff for 1% of their population, when they could have been designing something for 99% of their population. It's like, where does your time go? So yeah, if popularity of the CV just nosedives and nobody plays the damn thing, well then sure, they just wasted a lot of time. But the class had to be altered. This chart right here, where the CV's influence was just something stupid, this was not working in their game in a way that they felt was viable, so they had to alter it. And the new numbers, at least the new normal, is within shouting distance of each other. So whether people are playing it or not, it was still a net positive. But yeah, as a game developer, you make a game to be fucking played. Like, if nobody's playing it, well then why the hell did you do it? It would have been easier to scrap the class than it would have been to just kind of redesign everything.
Thank you. Okay, so all these changes that are coming to the AA, I mean, they seem really strong. I don't have like anything to say, oh my god, oh my god. It's quite the contrary. I think it's going to be very, very ruthless for the CVs. I mean, we've kind of been all oppressed for so long that I'm definitely going to enjoy a couple of patches of this, just murdering planes. But the difference, basically the same topic, is it's about, 7% more popular now than pre-rework. Only you know how much you invested, the time and effort and all of this. And with the next couple of patches, it will probably drop even more. Is this even going to be worth it? And do you maybe consider changing the focus of the CVs finally to not be the destructor of navies and be more focused on scouting, like reward the one thing that they are really truly masterful at, the scouting?
Oh, we have Sergey Vorobyev joining us. You want to?
So Flybet's just asking, do you want to pull away from damage, make this like a scout-only recon class or something? Which I would say is probably a more support-oriented
Sorry, but you need to
concept.
speak into mic because we're recording from the mics. So repeat once again, please.
So I just don't like when people are playing with numbers. 7%, not out of 100%, but it was like, give me the graph. Too many slides.
Lots of slides.
Yeah. So it was 15. Now it's 22. So it's literally 50% comparing to what we had before, and that's kind of noticeable. It's not 7% out of player base. It doubled in the beginning, and now it's 1.5 comparing to what we had before. Just to be on the same page with numbers.
It is considerable, but this will plummet even further. With the upcoming changes, I'm not sure. I can't, say for sure like how ruthless it's going to be, but I think it's going to be pretty ruthless for all the CV players. I've been playing carriers since forever as a hobby inside of a hobby, if you want to put it. And I do occasionally enjoy to do exactly what you did here, like make people play it at least a couple of games. But I'm not really sure it's going to be enjoyable.
I think that's a valid concern. I think we already answered it honestly by saying that we will keep looking for any fluctuations, and we'll be ready to apply. First of all, these numbers are work in progress about the severity of the changes. Second is we'll be keeping eye on the things, and third is I just want to highlight. Oh my God, I need to make index next time. So I want to highlight that. Basically, this change is important. This change is very important. This, honestly, I wrote here, it's myth mostly because this AA damage application rate is mostly about the perception on first fire contact when the plane dips into a long. It's not like I don't believe that this will drop carriers consistently. We'll have one update to observe things and apply some changes. This is mostly just about feels. I don't think it will affect the efficiency a lot. This one change. This is important, and this is as well, but this is mostly about...
I was just mentioning about the whole three things to come. Like, when you're done with this...
Yes. This is why it's written right here that we will be waiting with spotting for now, and we'll be very careful. But thank you for your concern. We'll try not to nerf carriers into the ground, and yeah, thank you. We have time for one more question, guys. And sorry for hurrying. We will be able to talk. We have dinner. Evan will join us. If you don't have a question answered, we'll be able to talk more today. So don't worry about it.
First of all, big thanks for taking us through all the data and everything. That was really great to see. More to the point, the question that I have is kind of twofoldish. One, will you then, after this, start looking at Tier 6 and Tier 8 balance? And tweak that. Where are you guys at with that kind of balance in your mind? And then when we first started the rework, there was talk about reintroducing other aircraft carriers at either an odd tier or a second line, so to speak. Is there any progress on that?
On the second line, currently we're working on some prototypes for now, but just That's as much as we can say right now. And regarding the other tiers, we see that in efficiency, the tier 6 is mostly where we want it. So it's quite possible that with these changes we will need to buff it. And same goes for tier 4. But the tier 8 right now is kind of a problem. So I'm not sure we will need any tweaks to tier 8 at all, but we're obviously monitoring all the tiers and we treat them differently, obviously.
Yeah, tier 8s and tier 10s, 8.5 was a sledgehammer to both, but they were powerful for what they did, so the sledgehammer was okay. I mean, it pulled them into a better position. Unfortunately, I think he referenced the tier 4 buffs, where they buffed the Japanese as well as the US carrier. I think they doubled the amount of torpedoes they dropped, which led to a whole bunch of people just curb stomping newer players in tier 4. Yeah, because tier 4 was what was modified, which was really not a good idea. It only took them about a year to a year and a half to reverse that, to where they're back to, I think the Hosho drops a single torp and the US still dropped 2, but they were like, they pulled 40% of the damage out. So that it fits much more correctly. And I have to say, post those nerfs, when doing the regrind streams that I've done, the tier 4s are extremely anemic, quite shitty in terms of damage. So very hard to have map influence at tier 4. Mostly tier 4 is just about trying to figure out how to shoot stuff. Because a new player is going to have a point where, when this is the first time you've ever played a thing, you got to figure out how to make the thing work. Well, that's what tier 4 is. So the AA sucks, but the damage sucks. The speed on the plane sucks, so the influence is low. So I mean, there's not a lot there, but it's a good learning platform. Anyway, he referenced like, oh, we might have to buff it, and I'm thinking internally like, no, I know what that looks like, and it sucks. But it's 2 years later now, so that's been reverted.
Because they're the difference relative to the tier of like tier 4 carriers and tier 10 carriers is significant there.
The problem with tier 8 carriers for us, the main problem is that, as you all know, tier 8 nowadays gets up tiered pretty bad, and a lot of CV players complain about having tier 10 matches as well. But most of all player base who plays at tier 8 have equal amount of tier 10 battles. The problem is that carriers right now are the best class to up tier, so they suffer least from the up tiering. And relative to other tier 8 ships, like we probably, as Ivan said, we won't need to remedy it a lot, but working on tier 8 matchmaking is a separate thing, and we're working on it as well. And when it changes, and it will change and it will improve in the nearest future, I hope, we will see the evaluate situation again, because we took tier 10 as benchmark because it's really like it gives you really good results because it's tier 10. On tier 8, situations will change because of matchmaking too, so it's kind of tricky.
So
and they did a matchmaker update too.
About the +1, -1 matchmaking talk. But your description there about CVs having the most impact, is that part of the reason why you're not...
So for matchmaking, we do have some information, but it will be NDA. We'll talk about it later. But long story short, we appreciate the problem. We've been working on improving the matchmaking, especially for tier 8s, but it's not about having +/-1. It's about distribution across battle tiers, and it is also about having the amount of tier 8 ships in tier 10 battles being the lonely tier 8 with all tier 10s, addressing all these problems. But none of these solutions for now includes +1. It's about matchmaking algorithms and making player comfortable conditions in terms of amount of tier 10s he sees.
So just to say what that is, +1, -1 matchmaking, it means that if you're in a tier 8 CV, theoretically, wouldn't it be nice if at the worst you saw tier 9 ships, at the best you saw tier 7 ships? That way AA is more correctly within shouting distance of each other. Realistically, if you look at the plane health from tier 6 to tier 8, the difference is like 150 health. It's pretty small. The speed difference is an extra 5-10%. It's pretty small. So the AA is not that that different, although AA becomes a much more effective, basically starting at tier 8. So for instance, tier 6 CVs can have a pretty oppressive time going against some tier 8 ships. Tier 8 CVs can have an oppressive time going against tier 10s. But he referenced in the latter part of this, and people may have forgotten, there was a matchmaking rework or a matchmaking update or something they did maybe a year and a half ago. Whereas, because he was saying sometimes it sucked to be the lowly tier 8. You could be a tier 8 carrier with 11 other tier 10s in the match. So it's like, this is cool. You're just going to go up against 6 Minotaurs and 6 Minotaurs and 4 Hollands in a tier 8 carrier. Yay! Like, all you're gonna do is just all your shit's gonna die. When they changed Matchmaker, they added limitations, or at least they tried to, because sometimes there are queue dumps where if there are tier 8s in it and there are tier 10s, there need to be at least 4 tier 8s, at least 4 tier 9s, at least 4 tier 10s, something like that. So there's a spread, so you're not just like the weakest dude ever, because there are other things that are going to be of similar tier to you to interact with. So while yes, there is threat from the higher tiers, there are also people that you can have a back and forth with. And I mean, the matchmaker change I think was pretty significant, but it's easy to forget that it happened. But if you try to think back to what used to exist, it's like, oh yeah, that was rough. And I remember actually being tier 8 in a CV or tier 6 in a CV, and you're just like, everything's tier 8 on the other side. So holy crap. That was pretty rough.
So it's slightly different, but no +1 yet. Sorry.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Let's go. Well, you're not going anywhere. You can have some coffee, and the next presentation will be shortly. Thank you very much.
Cool. So this is the 2019 CV Summit video in regards to CC Summit video in regards to CVs, in regards to carriers. Carriers have been released, I think, 4 to 5 months prior, so it's definitely a hot topic, and they wanted to go over, these are the results that we've seen, these are the trends that we're seeing, this is what we're trying to do in response to the trends, which was mostly that they were trying to bring carriers down to fit in the overall sense of the game. And this literally happened one day after the patch 8.5 drop, which, as I've stated multiple times, was an earthquake. So that just 8.5 was the sledgehammer that ripped the face off the human being that was the carrier and left them bleeding on the ground, unresponsive. And 8.6 didn't change a damn thing. It just made people feel like their A was more responsive. So, I mean, it was more consistent. Consistency is nice. And then 8.7 is what kind of brought them back up, dusted them off and said, it's going to suck out there, but you'll be okay. And then we've pretty much got what we've got now. So I might re-record this. I'll try to listen to this while I'm at work because I talked a lot during this area, and maybe I just frankly talked too damn much, but hopefully it was informative. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a good day.